Okay, you ready?
Here we go. Cool?
Yep.
Okay.
This used to be one of the richest streets in the world. Right here. Not Fifth Avenue, not the Champs-Élysées, not Rodeo Drive, Euclid Avenue, Cleveland, Ohio. At its peak, this street was called the Showplace of America. Travel guides compared it to Paris. And for a window of time in the late 1800s and early 1900s, the wealth concentrated on this stretch of road was genuinely extraordinary. Names you know, Rockefeller. Names you should know, people who shaped how the country works, who helped build its railroads, light its cities, run its banks and its politics, and they all lived here. And almost all of it is gone. You can drive down this street today and not know any of this, because what replaced the mansions, the storefronts, the parking lots, the commercial buildings, doesn't announce itself. It just looks like a city. But underneath all of it, in that architecture that survived, in the buildings that got repurposed, in the rooms that got reimagined, the story is still here. You just have to know where to look. Oh, and I'm gonna show you. I'm Mike Polk, and this is Undiscovered Cleveland. Today, the street that built an empire. So let me tell you what this street actually was. In the mid-1800s, Cleveland was booming. Factories, railroads, oil refining, iron, steel, shipping on Lake Erie. By 1910, Cleveland was the 6th largest city in the country. And the people who were making all the money off that, well, they had to live somewhere. They chose here, Euclid Avenue. The mansions weren't placed shoulder to shoulder like brownstones in New York. Each of them was set on 2 to 5 acres of land, surrounded by beautiful gardens, set back from the road, and protected by ornate gates. Of course, back in the day, this mansion would have been neighbored by another mansion on that side and another mansion on this side, but not so much anymore. The sidewalks were paved with Medina sandstone, and the street was lined with elm trees. Baedeker's, the most respected travel journal of the era, referred to Euclid as the Showplace of America. Visitors compared it to the Champs-Élysées. And the people who lived here weren't just wealthy, they were consequential. We're inside what is now the Cleveland Clinic Foundation House. Pretty nice, huh? Construction was completed on this place in 1912 for Francis Drury, who made his fortune in the kerosene stove industry and was a contemporary of a guy you might have heard of named John D. Rockefeller. Now, there are magnates and there are magnates, and John D. Rockefeller, he was a magnate. He lived on this street while he was building Standard Oil, the company that would eventually control 90% of the oil refining in the United States, and make him, by most accounts, the richest person in the history of the modern world. His house cost $40,000 to build in 1868, and he lived there until 1884. The house was demolished in 1938. John Hay also lived on this street. He had been Abraham Lincoln's personal secretary. He later became Secretary of State under both McKinley and Theodore Roosevelt and negotiated the open door policy with China. He helped clear the way for the Panama Canal, and he went home at night to Euclid Avenue. Jephthah Wade, founder of Western Union Telegraph, lived on Euclid. Marcus Hanna, the political kingmaker who managed William McKinley's presidential campaign and essentially invented the modern fundraising-driven political campaign, was a fixture here. 15 of the grandest homes were designed by the same architect, Charles Schweinfurth, who also built the Trinity Cathedral and several of Cleveland's bridges. Some mansions required up to 100 servants to maintain the place. By 1937, not a single one was still occupied as a private home. Now, let's talk architecture. This gorgeous house that I'm in right now was created by 2 prominent architects at the time, Frank Mead and James Hamilton. Some of the things you find in these historic homes might not actually be from that home. Like this awesome mid-19th century mirror. It used to hang in a different mansion on Millionaires Row, but it was donated here when that place was demolished. I think it ties the whole room together. Imagine this street in 1895. Go ahead, give yourself a second. Get there. You're in a carriage on Euclid Avenue. The street is quiet, except for the sound of hoofbeats on the sandstone. On either side, through the elms, you can glimpse the estates. Stone facades set 100 or 200 feet back from the road. Formal gardens, greenhouses, carriage houses that were themselves larger than most homes in the city. One neighbor had a laboratory in his basement and a 60-foot windmill in his backyard. Another neighbor's library was paneled with black ebony and white ivory insets. Someone down the street once threw an elegant dinner party for the 100 craftsmen who built his house in order to thank them. On Sunday mornings, the Rockefeller family drives past in a phaeton carriage in the summer, a closed coupe in the winter, on their way to Euclid Avenue Baptist Church, just 2 blocks over. Local kids used to try to hitch their sleds onto the back of the coupe. The coachman had a rawhide whip to try and knock them off. The kid who stayed on the longest was declared the Boy of the Week. Great title. This was a neighborhood, an extraordinary, once-in-a-generation, completely unrepeatable neighborhood, but still a neighborhood where people lived and argued and raised kids and waved at each other across the street. Rolling? Okay. Hey, how's it going? You're on Millionaires Row. You're on Millionaires Row. So, from what you are aware that we are on Millionaires Row, right?
Well, I mean, of course.
Did you know that Euclid Avenue used to be known as Millionaires Row?
I did know that.
You did?
Yeah.
Do you know why they called it Millionaires Row at the time?
Well, you know, when all the first millionaires came down here, they just took a look around and they said, yeah, this feels right.
Is that what it was? This place was one of the wealthiest places on
What's
Earth.
wealth then?
Wealth. What is wealth? Right.
That's what they put down in the ancient tweets of that time.
That idea stream's here, and we're about to head into idea stream.
Okay, we'll go in, but I was
On
talking
this floor.
specifically about the history of the street.
Wasn't there a streetcar?
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew that.
Okay, there you go. Streetcar. Not bad. Okay, she knows her stuff.
If you're from Cleveland, you can make it. This is the land of hope and opportunity.
It's all materialistic, bro. Well, what's the purpose of Rockefeller creating that? Tax purposes.
Kid gave me a lot to think about. Do you know about any of the other people other than Rockefeller who lived on Millionaires Row?
Yeah, this dude named Jeff, he made amazing paninis.
I was talking like back then, though. Happy Millionaires Row.
Hey.
All right. Now I want to tell you about some of the people who lived here, because Millionaires Row is not just a story about architecture, it's a story about what happens when extraordinary ambition, new money, and a very specific moment in American history all end up on the same street. Let's start with the inventor. He knew about this place. Come on in. Charles Brush was already famous when he moved to Euclid Avenue in 1884, but that house was a few blocks down that he lived in. He did, however, also own this house. Wait, this house, but bigger. He'd invented the arc lamp, a system of electric street lighting that lit Broadway 2 years before Thomas Edison's Pearl Street Station lit New York. He installed the first electric light system in the United States right here in Cleveland in 1879. He was a very serious scientist. And in 1888, he built the world's first automatically operated wind turbine generator in his own backyard on Millionaires Row. An 80,000-pound sawmill, 60 feet tall with 144 blades made of cedar, spinning in the Cleveland wind. It charged 12 batteries in his basement and powered 350 incandescent light bulbs, 2 arc lights, and several small motors. The house ran entirely on wind power for nearly 20 years without a single failure. His neighbor across the street was Rockefeller. The man building the fossil fuel industry lived across from the man running his mansion on renewable energy. Weird times. In 1929, Brush stipulated in his will that the mansion had to be demolished after his death unless a family member was living there. Neither of his daughters wanted to maintain it. Within a year of his death, his wish was fulfilled. It had been built to last, and it had lasted, but he didn't want it to outlive its purpose. There's something very Cleveland about that. Ooh. Whew. Well, that is a very large door. The most consequential room on Millionaires Row might have been a library. In Daniel Eel's mansion, a Victorian villa at 3201 Euclid Avenue, and since 1996, on the site of what is now this very futuristic Applied Industrial Technologies campus. But back then, it boasted a library paneled in black ebony and white ivory. Remember from before? Political boss Mark Hanna sat down with a man named William McKinley and convinced him to run for president of the United States. McKinley would win in 1896, win again in 1900, and be assassinated in 1901. Hanna had been working towards a McKinley presidency for years. He created the modern fundraising-driven presidential campaign, systematically approaching major donors and corporations for contributions in a way that had never been done before. He reportedly spent between $3 and $7 million on the 1896 campaign. And the whole thing started with a conversation in a fancy library right here on Euclid Avenue. Oh, hello. We're now in the vault at the Metropolitan at the 9 Hotel. We're still on Euclid Avenue in what used to be a bank, but now it's a swanky cocktail bar. Back in the day, some of Cleveland's wealthiest, including many on Millionaires Row, would keep all of their treasures here. In fact, right behind me here is the room where they kept their safety deposit boxes. Don't bother, I already looked, it's all empty. Wikipedia describes Euclid Avenue's most infamous resident as Cassie Chadwick, and that is exactly right. She was a Canadian-born fraudster who, through a series of marriages and name changes and small-scale cons going back to her teenage years, eventually landed on Euclid Avenue when she married a wealthy Cleveland doctor named Leroy Chadwick in 1897. Is this okay? Hey, be honest. Do I look masculine in this chair? She wasn't accepted into the social circle of the Rockefellers and the Hannahs. She was invited to social events only out of obligation to her husband. So she decided to invent a better biography. Specifically, she told people she was the illegitimate daughter of Andrew Carnegie. She forged his signature on promissory notes totaling millions of dollars. She claimed she had $7 million in notes locked in a safety deposit box and would inherit $400 million when Carnegie died. Banks, eager to be connected to the Carnegie fortune, loaned her money at a remarkable rate. For 8 years, this worked. She became known as the Queen of Ohio. She spent lavishly. She had a gold organ installed in her living room. And reportedly, she once had a dinner party that cost over $100,000. And that's in old-timey money, so imagine. How's this for mood lighting? When the scheme collapsed in 1904, one Ohio bank went into bankruptcy. Carnegie himself attended her trial. Cassie Chadwick was arrested wearing a money belt with over $100,000 on it. She was convicted, sentenced to prison, and died there in 1907. She had actually never even met Andrew Carnegie. What a dame. So what happened? Well, the short version, the success that built Millionaires Row also destroyed it. As Cleveland's factories expanded and the city grew more industrialized, the air quality on Euclid Avenue declined. The smoke from the steel mills was so bad that the stone facades on the mansions began to turn black. The wealthy began moving east to Cleveland Heights and Shaker Heights, new suburbs made accessible by the electric streetcar and then the automobile. By the 1920s, the western end of Euclid Avenue near Public Square had already been given over to commercial development. Department stores, theaters, office buildings. The families moved, the taxes went up, the mansions became impractical. Too expensive to heat, too large to staff, too expensive to maintain. Some were converted into rooming houses during the Great Depression. Some were sold to institutions and torn down for new buildings. The final blow came in the 1950s when the Interbelt Freeway cut directly through the Euclid Avenue corridor. And here's the thing that really gets me. Clevelanders didn't fight particularly hard to save them. In the 1940s and 50s, these Victorian and Gothic mansions were considered outdated and unattractive. When the Everett Mansion was demolished in 1938, the Plain Dealer's headline described it as a structure that was considered fashionable at one time. Past tense. By the 1960s, what had been considered one of the most expensive addresses in the country was, by many accounts, a 2-mile stretch of commercial buildings and aging housing. It didn't just disappear overnight. It became things like this, a parking lot where the Everett Mansion used to stand. It was replaced piece by piece over the course of 40 years, which is somehow even sadder. But some of it survived. A handful of buildings from Millionaires Row still remain here on Euclid Avenue. The exact count depends on what your definition of fully intact means, but you still get a pretty good sense of what this place used to look like. This is the Mather Mansion. Built in 1910 for iron magnate Samuel Mather, designed by Charles Schweinfurth, the same architect responsible for 15 other Millionaires Row homes. It's considered one of the last great houses built on this street. 45 rooms, a third-floor ballroom with 16-foot ceilings. It could host 300 guests at a time. Today, it's a part of Cleveland State University. The bones are all completely intact. The scale of the thing, to stand in front of it is to be impressed. This is allegedly where Ms. Mather kept her jewelry in here, so just to keep it safe. So she'd just be like, I'm just gonna go get my brooch. 1 second. Oh, I'm just gotta look nice tonight. Then you go in, I'm gonna go pick something out. And you go in. Oh, it's too gaudy. Oh, okay, there's nothing worthwhile in here really anymore. It's pretty pick clean. Wait a second, hold on, wait a second. Oh my gosh. It was in there. I had that in my pocket. These buildings are why the history is still recoverable. They're not just architectural relics, they're proof of what this street once was. When you stand in front of the Mather Mansion and you look up, you're seeing Millionaires Row at close to full resolution. Everything else is gone, but this is what all of it looked like. I want to show you something. Believe it or not, you are in a grocery store. And that dome above you is 85 feet high. The building was constructed in 1908 for the Cleveland Trust Company, the bank that held the fortunes of the families who lived on Millionaires Row. Designed by George Post, who 5 years earlier had designed the New York Stock Exchange, the rotunda's stained glass ceiling, whether it's actually by Tiffany or just in the style of Tiffany is still genuinely debated, has a green and yellow floral pattern set in lead glass. The marble columns are original. And the bronze Cleveland Trust Company seal is still embedded right where I'm standing. Just below the dome, there are 13 painted murals depicting the exploration and settlement of the Great Lakes region. They were painted by a man named Francis David Millet. Mark Twain was his best man at his wedding. He went down with the Titanic in 1912. The bank closed in 1996, sat empty for almost 20 years. Plans to turn it into county offices fell through. Plans to tear it down were considered, so it just sat there, closed in the middle of downtown Cleveland for 2 decades. Now owned by Geist Construction, in 2015, Heinen's Fine Foods opened here, a grocery store. So now, instead of teller windows, there are meat and fish cases ringing the rotunda. There's a wine bar and a beautiful balcony view. You can get a beer on tap and walk around while you shop under that 85-foot stained glass dome. The Plain Dealer called the renovation both visionary and very, very smart. And that might be the biggest understatement I've ever read in a newspaper. Also, the building appeared in the 2012 Marvel film, The Avengers. It plays a bank in New York City. So the Cleveland's Trust Building has been both a Cleveland icon and a stand-in for New York, which somehow feels correct. Now here's the thing about this story that I keep coming back to. Most cities that had a Millionaires Row, and a lot of American cities had one, lost them the same way that Cleveland did. The wealthy moved to the suburbs, the street declined, the mansions came down. That part is not unique. What is a little unique is what Cleveland did with what was left. The wealth that was built here didn't just evaporate when the mansions went. It funded institutions. The Cleveland Museum of Art, the Cleveland Orchestra, the Natural History Museum, Western Reserve University, all of it was seeded by money that came from Euclid Avenue. The people who lived here weren't just building homes, they were building the infrastructure of a city. The endowments they created are still running those institutions today. And then there's the street itself. Euclid Avenue is also where, on August 5th, 1914, the world's first electric traffic light was installed, right here, at the corner of East 105th and Euclid. Designed by a Cleveland man named James Hoge. The same street that had one of the largest private windmills in the world running in somebody's backyard also hosted the first traffic light in the history of the automobile. Euclid Avenue just keeps showing up at the beginning of things. This city did not lose its history, it built over it. Millionaires Row isn't gone, it's layered into what replaced it. The dome above the grocery store, the Mather Mansion on a college campus, the endowments at the art museum, the traffic light at a corner most people drive through without a second thought. The wealth and the ambition and the scale of what happened here in that window of time, it's still here. It's just not where you'd expect to find it. You can drive this street every day and never know what it used to be. The kid who used to hitch his sled to Rockefeller's carriage on Sunday mornings and get chased off by the coachman's whip, he wrote about it decades later, and he still sounded delighted by the memory. That street was alive in a way that is genuinely hard to picture standing here now. But once you see it, once you know that the inventor running his house on wind power lived across from the man building the oil industry, that a con artist in a money belt was spending fake Carnegie dollars right down the road, that a presidential campaign was launched nearby in a library paneled in ebony and ivory, and that the whole thing was considered unfashionable and torn down within living memory, you can't drive down this street the same way again. The history is under your feet and above your head in the grocery store with the 85-foot dome. You just have to know it's there. I'm Mike Polk, and this was Undiscovered Cleveland.